Good morning. It is misty and beautiful. Thank you for being with me. I'm going to continue with chapter 8. What if they use dirty tricks? Taming the hard bargainer. Principal negotiation is all very well, but what if the other negotiator deceives you or tries to throw you off balance? Or what if he escalates his demands just when you are on the verge of agreement? There are many tactics and tricks people can use to try to take advantage of you. Everyone knows some of them. They range from lies and psychological abuse to various forms of pressure tactics. They may be illegal, unethical, or simply unpleasant. Their purpose is to help the user win some substantive gain in an unprincipled contest of will. Such tactics may be called tricky bargaining. If they recognize that a tricky bargaining tactic is being used against them, most people respond in one of two ways. The first standard response is to put up with it. It is unpleasant to rock the boat. You may give the other side the benefit of the doubt, or get angry and promise yourself never to deal with them again. For now, you hope for the best and keep quiet. Most people respond this way. They hope that if they give in this time, the other side will be appeased and will not ask for more. Sometimes this works, but more often it fails. This is how Neville Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, responded in 1938 to Hitler's negotiating tactics. After Chamberlain thought he had an agreement, Hitler raised his demands. At Munich, Chamberlain, hoping to avoid war, went along. A year later, World War II started. The second common response is to respond in kind. If they start outrageously high, excuse me, if they start outrageously high, you start outrageously low. If they are deceptive, then so are you. If they make threats, you make counter threats. If they lock themselves into their position, you lock yourself even more tightly into yours. In the end, either one party yields or all too often, negotiations break off. Such tricky tactics are illegitimate because they fail the test of reciprocity. They are designed to be used by only one side. The other side is not supposed to know the tactics or is expected to tolerate them knowingly. Earlier we argued that an effective counter to a one-sided substantive proposal is to examine the legitimacy of the principle that the proposal reflects. Tricky bargaining tactics are in effect one-sided proposals about negotiating procedure, about the negotiating game that the parties are going to play. To counter them, you will want to engage in principled negotiation about the negotiating process. Here we are on page 130. How do you negotiate about the rules of the game? There are 3 steps in negotiating the rules of the negotiating game, where the other side seems to be using a tricky tactic. Recognize the tactic, raise the issue explicitly, and question the tactic's legitimacy and desirability. Negotiate over it. You have to know what is going on to be able to do something about it. learn to spot particular ploys that indicate deception, those designed to make you uncomfortable, and those which lock the other side into their position. Often just recognizing a tactic will neutralize it. Realizing, for example, that the other side is attacking you personally in order to impair your judgment may well frustrate the effort. After recognizing the tactic, bring it up with the other side. Say, Joe, I may be totally mistaken, but I'm getting the feeling that you and Ted here are playing a good guy, bad guy routine. If you two want a recess anytime to straighten out differences between you, just ask. Discussing the tactic not only makes it less effective, it also may cause the other side to worry about alienating you completely. Simply raising a question about a tactic may be enough to get them to stop using it. The most important purpose of bringing the tactic up explicitly, however, is to give you an opportunity to negotiate about the rules of the game. This is the third step. This negotiation focuses on procedure instead of substance, but the goal remains to produce a wise agreement, this time about procedure, efficiently and amicably. Not surprisingly, the method remains the same. Alright, the next is separate the people from the problem. Do not attack people personally for using a tactic you consider illegitimate. If they get defensive, it may be more difficult for them to give up the tactic, and they may be left with a residue of anger that will fester and interfere with other issues. Question the tactic, not their personal integrity. Rather than saying, "You deliberately put me here facing the sun," attack the problem. I am finding the sun in my eyes quite distracting. Unless we can solve the problem, I may have to leave early to get some rest. Shall we revise the schedule? It will be easier to reform the negotiating process than to reform those with whom you are dealing. Don't be diverted from the negotiation by the urge to teach them a lesson. Oh, that's good. That's a good line. Do not be diverted from the negotiation by the urge to teach them a lesson. How much life is wasted trying to teach people lessons. Okay, the next one is focus on interests, not positions. Why are you committing yourself in the press to an extreme position? Are you trying to protect yourself from criticism? Or are you protecting yourself from changing your position? Is it in our mutual interest to have both of us use this tactic? And the next, invent options for mutual gain. Suggest alternative games to play. How about our undertaking to make no statements to the press until we reach agreement or break off the talks? And the next, insist on using objective criteria. Above all, be hard on principle. Is there a theory behind having me sit in the low chair with my back to the open door? Try out the principle of reciprocity on them. I assume that you will sit in this chair tomorrow morning. Frame the principle behind each tactic as a proposed rule for the game. Shall we alternate spilling coffee on one another day by day? As a last resort, turn to your batna, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement and walk out. It's my impression that you're not interested in negotiating in a way that we both think will produce results. Here's my phone number. If I'm mistaken, I'm ready anytime you are. Until then, we'll pursue the court option. If you are walking out on clearly legitimate grounds, as when they have deliberately deceived you about facts or their authority, and if they are genuinely interested in an agreement, they are likely to call you back to the table. The next, some common tricky tactics. Tricky tactics can be divided into 3 categories: deliberate deception, psychological warfare, and positional pressure tactics. You should be prepared to deal with all 3. Below are a number of common examples of each type. For each, in turn, we show how principal negotiation might be applied to counter it. Okay. Sorry. Sip there. Deliberate deception. Perhaps the most common form of dirty trick is misrepresentation about facts, authority, or intentions. First is phony facts. The oldest form of negotiating trickery is to make some knowingly false statement. This car was driven only 5,000 miles by a little old lady from Pasadena who never went over 35 miles per hour. The dangers of being taken in by false statements are great. What can you do? Separate the people from the problem. Unless you have good reason to trust somebody, don't. This does not mean calling him a liar. Rather, it means making the negotiation process proceed independent of trust. Do not let someone treat your doubts as a personal attack. No seller is likely to give you a watch or a car simply in exchange for your statement that you have money in the bank. Just as a seller will routinely check on your credit, because there are so many other people around that can't be trusted. You can do the same for statements of the other side. A practice of verifying factual assertions reduces the incentive for deception and your risk of being cheated. The next is ambiguous authority. The other side may allow you to believe that they, like you, have full authority to compromise when they do not. After they have pressed you as hard as they can and you have worked out what you believe to be a firm agreement, they announce that they must take it to someone else for approval. This technique is designed to give them a second bite at the apple. This is a bad situation to fall into. If only you have authority to make concessions, only you will make concessions. Do not assume that the other side has full authority just because they are there negotiating with you. An insurance adjuster, a lawyer, a salesperson may allow you to think that your flexibility is being matched by flexibility on their side. You may later find that what you thought was an agreement will be treated by the other side as simply a floor for further negotiations. Before starting on any give and take, find out about the authority on the other side. It is perfectly legitimate to inquire, just how much authority do you have in this particular negotiation? If the answer is ambiguous or unclear, you may wish to talk to someone with real authority, or to make clear that you, on your side, are reserving equal freedom to reconsider any point. If they do announce unexpectedly that they are treating what you thought was an agreement as a basis for further negotiation, insist on reciprocity. All right, we will treat it as a joint draft to which neither side is committed. You check with your boss and I'll sleep on it and see if I come up with any changes I want to suggest tomorrow. Or you might say, if your boss approves this draft tomorrow, I'll stick by it. Otherwise, each of us should feel free to propose changes. All right, the next one is dubious intentions. Gosh, I get to use that word dubious very often. Where the issue is one of possible misrepresentation of their intention to comply with the agreement, it is often possible to build compliance features into the agreement itself. Suppose you are a lawyer representing the wife in a divorce negotiation. Your client does not believe her husband will pay child support. Excuse me. Even though he may agree to do so. The time and energy spent in going to court every month may make her give up the effort. What can you do? Make the problem explicit and use their protestations to get a guarantee. You could say to the husband's lawyer, look, my client is afraid those child support payments simply aren't going to be made. Rather than monthly payments, how about giving her equity in the house? The husband's lawyer may say, my client is perfectly trustworthy. We'll put it in writing that he will pay child support regularly. To which you might respond, it's not a matter of trust. Are you certain that your client will pay? Well, of course, 100% certain. Yes, I'm 100% certain. Then you won't mind a contingent agreement. Your client will agree to make child support payments. We'll provide that if, for some inexplicable... Oh, my Lord. Hang on. Then you won't mind a contingent agreement. Your client will agree to make child support payments. We'll provide that if, for some inexplicable reason, which you estimate at 0% probability, he misses 2 payments, my client will get the equity in the house, minus, of course, the amount your client has already paid out in child support, and your client will no longer be liable for child support. It is not easy for the husband's lawyer to object. And the next. Less than full disclosure is not the same as deception. Deliberate deception as to facts or one's intentions is quite different from not fully disclosing one's present thinking. Good faith negotiation does not require total disclosure. Perhaps the best answer to questions such as what is the most you would pay if you had to would be along the following lines. Let's not put ourselves under such a strong temptation to mislead. If you think no agreement is possible and that we may be wasting our time, perhaps we could disclose our thinking to some trustworthy third party who can then tell us whether there is a zone of potential agreement. In this way, it is possible to behave with full candor about information that is not being disclosed. The next one is psychological warfare. These tactics are designed to make you feel uncomfortable so that you will have a subconscious desire to end the negotiation as soon as possible. Stressful situations. Much has been written about the physical circumstances in which negotiations take place. You should be sensitive to such modest questions as whether a meeting takes place at your place or theirs, or on neutral territory. Contrary to the accepted wisdom, it is sometimes advantageous to accept an offer to meet on the other side's turf. It may put them at ease, making them more open to your suggestions. If necessary, it will be easier for you to walk out. If, however, you do allow the other side to choose the physical environment, be aware of what that choice is and what effects it may have. Ask yourself if you feel under stress, and if so, why? If the room is too noisy, if the temperature is too hot or cold, if there is no place for a private caucus with a colleague, be aware that the setting might have been deliberately designed to make you want to conclude negotiations promptly, and if necessary, to yield points in order to do so. If you find the physical surroundings prejudicial, do not hesitate to say so. You can suggest changing chairs, taking a break, or adjourning to a different location or another time. In every case, your job is to identify the problem. Be willing to raise it with the other side, and then negotiate better physical circumstances in an objective and principled fashion. Here comes the sun, my friends. All right, we're on page 135 of Getting to Yes, Negotiating Agreement Without Giving In by Roger Fisher and William Ury of the Harvard Negotiation Project. All right, we got another one here. Personal attacks. Just because the sun's almost here, I'm going to keep reading. Personal attacks. In addition to manipulating the physical environment, there are also ways for the other side to use verbal and non-verbal communication to make you feel uncomfortable. They can comment on your clothes or your appearance. Looks like you were up all night. Things not going well at the office. They can attack your status by making you wait for them or by interrupting the negotiations to deal with other people. They can imply that you are ignorant. They can refuse to listen to you and make you repeat yourself. They can deliberately refuse to make eye contact with you. Simple experiments with students have confirmed the malaise many feel when this tactic is used, and they are unable to identify the cause of the problem. In each case, recognizing the tactic will help nullify its effects. Bringing it up explicitly will probably prevent a reoccurrence. All right, the good guy, bad guy routine. One form of psychological pressure, which also involves deception, is the good guy, bad guy routine. This technique appears in its starkest form in old police movies. The first policeman threatens the subject with prosecution for numerous crimes, puts him under a bright light, pushes him around, and finally takes a break and leaves. The good guy then turns off the light, offers the suspect a cigarette, and apologizes for the tough policeman. He says he'd like to control the tough guy, but he can't unless the suspect cooperates. The result, the suspect tells all he knows. Similarly, in a negotiation, two people on the same side will stage a quarrel. One will take a tough stand. These books cost $8,000 and I won't accept a penny less. His partner looks pained and a little embarrassed. Finally, he breaks in. Frank, you are being unreasonable. After all, these books are 2 years old, even if they haven't been used much. Turning to the other side, he says reasonably, could you pay $7,600? The concession isn't large, but it almost seems like a favor. The good guy, bad guy routine is a form of psychological manipulation. If you recognize it, you won't be taken in. When the good guy makes his pitch, just ask him the same questions you ask the bad guy. I appreciate that you are trying to be reasonable, but I still want to know why you think that's a fair price. What is your principle? I am willing to accept $8,000 if you can persuade me it's the fairest price. We got threats left, and then I'm going to stop. Okay, threats. Threats are one of the most abused tactics in negotiation. A threat seems easy to make, much easier than an offer. All it takes is a few words, and if it works, you will never have to carry it out. But threats can lead to counter threats in an escalating spiral that can unhinge a negotiation and even destroy a relationship. Threats are pressure. Pressure often accomplishes just the opposite of what it is intended to do. It builds up pressure the other way. Instead of making a decision easier for the other side, it often makes it more difficult. In response to outside pressure, a union, a committee, a company, or a government may close ranks. Moderates and hawks join together to resist what they may perceive as an illegitimate attempt to coerce them. The question changes from should we make this decision to shall we cave in to outside pressure? Good negotiators rarely resort to threats. They do not need to. There are other ways to communicate the same information. If it seems appropriate to outline the consequences of the other side's action, suggest those that will occur independently of your will rather than those you could choose to bring about. Warnings are much more legitimate than threats and are not vulnerable to counter threats. Like, should we fail to reach agreement, it seems highly probable to me that the news media would insist on publishing the whole sordid story. In a matter of this much public interest, I don't see how we could legitimately suppress information. Do you? For threats to be effective, they must be credibly communicated. Sometimes you can interfere with the communication process. You can ignore threats. You can take them as unauthorized, spoken in haste, or simply irrelevant. You can also make it risky to communicate them. At a coal mine, where one of the authors was recently meditating, a large number of false but costly bomb threats were being received. These dropped off dramatically when the company's receptionist began answering all phone calls with, "Your voice is being recorded. What number are you calling?" Sometimes threats can be turned to your political advantage. A union could announce to the press, "Management has such a weak case that they are resorting to threats." Perhaps the best response to a threat, however, is to be principled. We have prepared a sequence of counter moves for each of management's customary threats. However, we have delayed taking action until we see whether we can agree that making threats is not the most constructively active. That making threats is not the most constructive activity we could engage in just now. Or, I only negotiate on the merits. My reputation is built on not responding to threats. Okay, there's like hardly any left here. We got like 4 pages left. But I'm gonna quit anyway. We got our set. Alright, the next one is positional pressure tactics. When you refuse to negotiate, when you extreme demands, escalated demands, lock-in tactics, hard-hearted partner, calculated delay. And then we'll be done with chapter 8. I'm sorry I can't finish it right now. But I am super thankful for you being with me. I hope you've enjoyed the sunrise and got to see a bird or two. I know I did. I appreciate you letting me read my books to you.